Well, thanks very much for joining us. I'm joined by the input-output management team, many of you of whom you've already met. Let me start. Maybe I could start with you, Charles. Most innovations from the Industrial Revolution through to the World Wide Web, they started out in the world's most advanced economies. You're kind of turning this on its head. Your focus on blockchain is now very much in the developing world. Why is that?
Well, you always go where there's a demand for the products that you build. And if you look at government technology, you look at the way that money works, if you look at the developed society, there's not as strong of a demand for upgrading or changing in the United States or the European Union as there are in Eastern Europe, Africa, Southeast Asia, and other places. Globalization is, for the most part, working okay for the United States and okay for Europe. Now, there's a lot of issues here and there, and there's the Rust Belt in the U.S., and we've lost a lot of our manufacturing base. And of course, there's the Great Reset. But all things considered, we're winning, whereas some other parts of the world aren't moving as quickly. So you don't do the same thing over and over again. That's the definition of insanity. Rather, what you do is you take a step back and you say, okay, how can we compete differently? So there's a much broader set of things you can do, and everything is on the table. New voting systems, new property systems, new payment systems, new way of identifying people, new way of trading securities. A great example would be the country of Estonia. They leave the Soviet bloc, and they kind of have to start in the 90s from ground zero. And now suddenly you can vote online. Now you have a national ID card. You have a lot of digitization of the infrastructure that surpasses anything in the UK or the United States. And that's because they didn't have a legacy system to protect. So if we say, okay, where will the greatest demand for the type of technology we build be over the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, it's going to start in places like the continent of Africa, the subcontinent of India. It's going to start in places like Mongolia or the country of Georgia. It's not going to be in the United States, in California or New York or other such places. They're going to have to catch up. And you see that again and again and again, where you have startups outcompeting old stodgy monopolies. The Microsofts outcompete the IBMs, and then the next cohort comes and outcompetes the Microsoft, and so forth. It's an endless cycle of innovation. Honestly, I think that's a misconception. Necessity is the mother of all invention. And if you look at, for example, internet connectivity, by 2030, the vast majority of people in Africa, well over 90%, will have high-speed internet connectivity through some means. Either it's cellular or satellite. Just look at what Starlink is doing and look at the proliferation of 5G. The cost of getting people online is going down, and the technologies used to get people online don't involve trenching out millions of miles of fiber optic cable. It's just a broadcast. And then you look at these cell phones that we have, they're supercomputers. And our upgrade cycles every 24 to 36 months. And where do they go after we upgrade? They don't just disappear. They don't just go thrown into a landfill. They become accessible to a different group of people. So the innovations of today are available tomorrow. So I think within 10 years, whatever infrastructure gap may be apparent, that's going to be closed. And the cost of doing things always falls. Once you have that baseline of infrastructure, in the digital commons, we're all equal. We all have access to the same educational content. We all have access to the same platforms, the same payment systems, the same way of doing business. So it becomes much more competitive, and it becomes much more merit-based rather than geographic or other considerations.
I think on top of the lack of a legacy system to replace and an obvious need to actually provide these services they don't have, I think demographics also plays an important factor. So I think in the African continent, the population is by and large much younger than the Western world, and new technologies are adopted far more quickly from the newer generations. The other point I think which is important is that this is a new technology that offers new features. And so in the past, if you had an idea and a problem to solve, the pieces that were missing was getting talent to bear to solve that problem and funding. So places like Silicon Valley and these centers of innovation were the primary drivers of innovation. With the blockchain, what's happening is you're democratizing this. You're giving access to a global infrastructure that allows for social and financial inclusion on a global scale. So on the opportunities that we worked on in Africa, we leveraged a global team off of 4 continents, and the funding comes from the mechanism. And we also have a governance system in place that democratizes this. So anybody, anywhere that has a good idea can use this system to bring that idea to fruition, and that's unique. This was previously only the purview of the innovation centers, and now this is becoming flatter, and innovation is going to the edges, and this is going to be the final piece of the puzzle of the internet that was missing, which is the democratization of it. Not before the big companies centralized it, and access to the talent and funding, which they didn't have in the past.